Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 3 of the NFL. This is the Sports Log podcast, and we have predictions, bets, daily fantasy, and start sit for you here. If you're new to the channel, I make fantasy football content as well as when we get to the NFL season. Of course, we got to do our lock bets of the week and predictions. If you haven't checked it out, go to Sports Lock Podcast on YouTube. You can find week 1 and week 2 and all of my fantasy football predictions from over the summer. So let's not waste time. Let's get into it. And at the end, we've got an announcement for a special guest on the next podcast next week that you don't want to miss. So we got to look back at week 2. Am I proud of week 2? Not really. There's one area that looks good on there if you're watching on YouTube. The win-loss 9-7. Could have done better. I think I took a couple risks there. The spread was 5-11, so not good there. And the over/under at 13-3. Forgot to add on here that my locks, I do 4 locks a week, split right in the middle, 2-2. But I'm very confident about this week's locks, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. So we got to look at the daily fantasy results from last week, and might I say that it was a lot better than week 1. We got Carson Wentz for a very good price. Went off at 27-8 fantasy points, 5th overall amongst quarterbacks in week 2. Take a look at Saquon Barkley. Not so good in week 2. Only 72 yards on the ground, 3 receptions for 16 yards. Not really what you were looking at of Saquon Barkley after that huge week 1 performance. We take a look at Javonte Williams. He only had 9.5 fantasy points. I was really high on Javonte Williams last week, especially after that huge week 1 performance on the road in Seattle. Russell Wilson utilized him, and he did not perform this past week at home like I thought he would against the Houston Texans. Also added Joe Mixon to the mix. I'll just let you think about that one for a minute, that pun there. But anyways, it was supposed to be Michael Pittman in my daily fantasy lineup, but he was rolled out after the podcast was up. So I went with Joe Mixon instead, 11.3. Still not the greatest, but, it is what it is. I thought that he could have, run over the Dallas defense and he needed to get involved, but he just didn't. So we take a look at the wide receivers, and again, a guy that I am very high on. And if you watch my TikToks, the Beast Penny Cakes, by the way, right now, Sports Lock Podcast does have a TikTok account, and it's as simple as that at Sports Lock Podcast. You can go follow me on there, but my past content is on my main account, the Beast Penny Cakes. I am so high on Amon-Ra St. Brown this season, and he was drafted way too low, in my opinion, in fantasy football drafts. And what a guy he is. A fantasy 4 out of the wide receivers so far in the first 2 weeks. And last week, we take a look at it, 9 receptions, 116 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's averaging about 8 to 9 receptions a game. It's incredible. Unfortunately, Jerry Jeudy, a guy that I thought good value for him last week, especially when we took a look at what Cortland Sutton was going for in daily fantasy. I believe he was $500 cheaper to get Jerry Jeudy. Unfortunately, he gets injured on the first catch, and that's all he got for 2.2 fantasy points. Another guy, though, that I've been high on and you can get great value for is Jahan Dotson, the rookie from Penn State playing for the Washington Commanders. He's caught a touchdown pass in each of the first 2 games, 4 receptions, 59 yards. He's doing it big so far down there, and he's got a good connection with Carson Wentz. And I believe he was only a little over, 4,500 around there. It's a great steal at a flex position for a guy that'll produce 17.9 fantasy points last week, 20th amongst wide receivers. Another good pickup was Tyler Higbee, the tight end from the Los Angeles Rams. Finished tight end 6, 7 receptions, 71 yards last week. I'll take that if he's not going to score a touchdown. 6th best among tight ends, 14.1 fantasy points. And of course, we had to pay up for those Buffalo Bills. That defense is just phenomenal, and I'm glad we did 20 fantasy points for them, 3rd best amongst the defenses last week. Again, the total was 108 in week 1. 154 last week. I did play this lineup in my daily fantasy, and I did win some money in a couple of them. So I was really thrilled about that. Now we'll go to the start sit, and of course, you know that week one sits were just spot on. I think if we added up the whole lineup, they only got maybe 4 or 5 fantasy points, so which is huge. Last week, not as good, but to start, how about Carson Wentz, quarterback for 27.8 fantasy points? He lit it up once again, a must start. And a quarterback that I told you to sit after a pretty decent week one is Jameis Winston of the Saints. 7.6 fantasy points, 28th amongst quarterbacks last week. So a very good outcome there. I told you to start Kareem Hunt, not only 9.4 fantasy points worse than he did in week one. That's because of the explosion of Nick Chubb for 3 touchdowns. I told you to sit Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He didn't do as great as week one, but still, running back 8 is fantastic. So probably not the best sit candidate for week two. We go off to Jerry Jeudy. Again, I told you to start him. I liked a lot about him, but unfortunately, the injury was taking him out of that. The sit, man, I hated to do the sit because Tyler Lockett is my guy. But I did after the bad week one performance, and he did come alive in week two. Tyler Lockett putting up some great numbers. He had, I believe, 9 receptions for 100 some yards. We'll get to it later, the exact number, because I know I have him this week for a start. But 19.7 fantasy points, 15th best among wide receivers last week. The start, Zach Ertz, told you to start him, 3rd best among the tight ends, which was great last week, 15.5 fantasy points. And Gerald Everett, he still would have got you great numbers. Tight end 8 at 13.1, so not the best sit candidate. But again, you can't always get them all right. And now we move on to our week 3 predictions. And boy, oh boy, do I hope I do better this coming week. Again, the locks are going to be highlighted if you're watching in the green, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But we're going to start with Thursday night football, and it's the Pittsburgh Steelers plus 4.5 at the Cleveland Browns. Right now, the over-under is set at 38. Look, Pittsburgh was one of my locks last week, plus 2.5. They just beat the Cincinnati Bengals in week one. You figure in week two, they got the Patriots, who struggled against the Dolphins to put up any points. Figure that's going to be a close game. And I mean, it was a half a point off. That was it. I thought Pittsburgh would win at home, though, and they just looked absolutely horrendous. They go to the Browns, who blew a huge lead with under 2 minutes to go to lose to the New York Jets. So this is really going to be an ugly Thursday night football game. Really nothing I want to bet at all. But if I have to, and where I'm going is I'm taking Pittsburgh plus 4.5. And I think they do get the win in Cleveland. I think that their defense can slow down the run and stop the Browns from putting up a lot of points. That's why I'm playing under 38. But like, this is it for me with Pittsburgh. If they cannot cover that 4.5, that is just absolutely ridiculous against a very poor Cleveland Browns team. So give me Pittsburgh plus 4.5 and the under of 38. All right, we'll move to Sunday, and we have the Houston Texans at the Chicago Bears, and this one should be actually a pretty good game. Houston surprising a lot of people, almost beating Denver, and then in week one, of course, tying with the Indianapolis Colts. You go to Chicago, who won in week one against the 49ers, but lost pretty bad to the Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football. Where I'm going is I'm saying Houston's going to cover that 3 because I think that Houston can win, but I'm going to pick Chicago to win at home. Justin Fields needs to step it up, and he's got to find Darnell Mooney, a guy that just tore it up last season with Allen Robinson there. We figured since he's the number 1 wide receiver this season that he would blow up, but he hasn't. He's been god-awful. But a guy I really like, and we'll talk about in a little bit, is David Montgomery in the run game. I think Chicago gets that going. They utilize him, and they pull out the victory at home. But it will be a low-scoring game. I'm playing under 40.5. Next, we have the Raiders. They're -2 at Tennessee. The over-under at 45.5. Tennessee, a team that I thought could win this division, and technically they still can. But boy, do they look terrible so far in the first 2 games, getting blown out against the Bills, and of course tying with the Houston Texans in week one. Meanwhile, the Raiders, not doing as good, but two very close games against the Chargers and the Cardinals, who they should have beat last week. So where am I going here? Well, I'm going to go with the Raiders. They played better competition and competed in those games compared to Tennessee. Tennessee is just struggling a lot. Derrick Henry looking terrible in the first two games. They got to get him going if they want to win. But I think this is a game that Derek Carr needs to just go off. We saw Josh Allen being able to do it with Stephon Diggs last week against this Tennessee defense. This has to be the Carr to Adams game. So give me the Raiders to win, to cover that two, and the over under. I'm going over 45.5 because I think that both teams will be putting up some points. My first lock of the week is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs -6.5 at the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are losing to the two of the worst teams in the first 2 weeks with the Jacksonville Jaguars and tying the Texans, which is a loss to me. The Kansas City Chiefs, they are, doing well in the first two games. And going into Indianapolis, I thought that the Colts, their defense can maybe shut down Patrick Mahomes, but the Chiefs are better than the Colts for sure. So I'm going to play that as a lock -6.5. The over under, I'm playing under 49.5 because I truly don't see Indianapolis putting up more than 14 points this week. Kansas City get somewhere in the 20s, I think, covered by a touchdown. Another lock, we're going the Buffalo Bills at the Miami Dolphins, and this time we're locking in the over 52 points. Last week, the Miami Dolphins and Baltimore Ravens put up a ton of points. I believe it was over 70 some was the over. Buffalo last week, 41 points, 31 the week before. Miami, they know how to put up points. So even though the Buffalo Bills have a fantastic defense, and so do the Miami Dolphins, this is going to be a shootout, a fun, high-scoring game. So I'm locking in the over of 52. I'm also going to take Buffalo to cover the 5.5. Miami looks phenomenal, but the Buffalo Bills look like the team to beat, just blowing out two good teams in the first week. The defending Super Bowl champs, the Los Angeles Rams of week 1, and of course the Tennessee Titans of week 2. So give me Buffalo to cover the 5.5 at Miami. Detroit +6 at Minnesota. Minnesota is coming off the loss to Philadelphia. Detroit picking up a good win against the Washington Commanders at home in week 2. So where do I go here? Well, I do think that the Lions cover that +6 at Minnesota. I think Minnesota does bounce back and win the game, but it's going to be very close, hard-fought game in that division rivalry game. Detroit, they almost beat the Philadelphia Eagles where Minnesota couldn't, so I'm half tempted to take a Detroit to outright win, but I think the safe bet here and the bet to go is Detroit +6. It's almost a lock for me, but I'm going to give Minnesota maybe a little bit of credit there. They need this bounce back win. The over-under of 53.5. Look, both teams can put up points, and we saw Detroit do it in the first 2 weeks, putting up over 30. My concern is that Minnesota's defense is pretty good, and they only gave up, 24 or so points to Philadelphia. So I think it's going to be lower scoring, so I'd play the under 53.5. My next lock is Baltimore -3 at New England. Baltimore coming off a very disappointing loss at home against Miami last week, and the Patriots picking up a narrow victory against the Steelers. But when we take a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 1, they barely beat and shouldn't have beat the Cincinnati Bengals after getting 5 takeaways. And then you look at the Bengals lose to Dallas with Cooper Rush at quarterback. That doesn't make the Steelers win in week 1 look good. The Patriots, not that great. The Steelers defense just held them in check. So I think Baltimore goes up to Foxborough and gets the victory by at least 3. And the under, I'm playing a 43.5 because the Patriots have yet to show that they can put points on the board. Baltimore can. So it's going to be all Baltimore in this one. I'm taking them -3 for my third lock of the week. Cincinnati -5 at the New York Jets. Look, Cincinnati needs this, right? They have lost their first 2 games after going to the Super Bowl last year. Joe Burrow looking horrendous in the first 2 games. They have weapons. They have talent on that team. But they're going into New York where the Jets, picked up the win on the road against Cleveland. Now that the Jets are at home, I am taking the Jets to cover that 5. Give me the Jets +5, but I will take Cincinnati to win. I feel like this is a do or die game for the Bengals. They got to win this one on the road to kind of just get on the right track. So I think Joe Burrow has a big game. This offense lights up. That's why I'm playing over 45. We saw the Jets put up points last week in Cleveland. So give me the Jets to cover the 5, but Cincinnati to win and over 45. All right, we have Philadelphia at Washington. We talked about Philadelphia beating the Minnesota Vikings and the Commanders losing on the road in Detroit in a tough one. Philadelphia -6.5. I am going to take Washington to cover that 6.5. They played Detroit really close. Detroit played Philly really close. You're going into a division game in Washington, so I think they do cover the 6.5. I'm going to play over 47 because I think they're going to have to put up a good amount of points. Washington's been proven to do so. Same with Philly. So I think the defenses will cancel out there. That's why I'm playing over 47. I like Washington to cover the 6.5. Philadelphia, though, to win the game. The Saints at the Panthers. The Saints are 3-point favorites going into Carolina. Carolina losing to the Giants in New York last week. And the Saints coming in looking to bounce back after that loss to Tampa Bay in an ugly one. Their defense did come alive. I do like the Saints to win and -3 in Carolina. I think it is a very close game, though. The over-under set a little bit too low for me at 40.5. I do think both teams hit at least 20 points. So I'm going to go the Saints to win 27-21. And I think that they take care of Carolina with that good defense. Jacksonville +7 at the Chargers. Now this one is kind of iffy depending on if Herbert's playing. The latest that we've heard out of practice is that he is day to day with that rib injury, but he's getting better every day. So I think that if he does play, they will cover that 7. Otherwise, I might take Jacksonville +7. Either way, I'm going to take the Chargers to win in LA, the over under. I'm going to play the over 47.5. I think both teams will put up a good amount of points in order to fight for the victory, but it'll be the Chargers in the end doing that. The Rams at the Cardinals. The Rams are -3.5, over under at 48.5. Arizona coming off a huge win in Las Vegas. The Rams barely holding on to beat the Atlanta Falcons at home. I'm taking Arizona to cover the 3.5, but I'm going to take the Rams to win a game that Los Angeles really needs here on the road. And Arizona, they did look good coming back in that win versus the Raiders, but I do see this being a very tough game for them against the defending Super Bowl champs. So give me the Rams to win, but Arizona to cover that 3.5. The over under at 48.5. I'm going to play under. The Rams have yet to really prove to me that that's going to be a high scoring affair. Arizona same as well. I think they both hit the low 20s, maybe a 24-21 game, which would still be under that 48.5. So that's what I'm doing with that one. Atlanta at Seattle. Atlanta again almost coming into Los Angeles winning that one. They go to Seattle, who struggled against the 49ers. I like Atlanta outright in this one. I like what I saw against the defending Super Bowl champs. Mariota looked really good. So Atlanta +2, and I'm going to take them outright to win at Seattle. Over under 42. I think that there's going to have to be points on the board. Both defenses are pretty bad. So I'm going to take over 42, but just by a little bit. Finally, we get to the last lock of the week, and that is Green Bay at Tampa Bay. I'm taking Tampa Bay -1.5. Green Bay had it pretty easy against the Bears in week 2, losing in week 1 to the Vikings pretty badly. They go against a very good number 1 defense in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're going to play Tom Brady. Of course, the Rodgers-Brady rivalry will go at it. But in the end, I think Tampa Bay easily gets the job done by at least a field goal. So give me Tampa Bay to win -1.5. The over-under of 42. Both teams kind of struggle to put up points, but I do think they hit the low 20s, pushing them over the 42 mark. So I'd play the over. Sunday Night Football, we have the 49ers at the Denver Broncos. And Denver's really, really disappointed me in the first 2 weeks, losing to Seattle and then almost losing to the Houston Texans at home. Russell Wilson didn't look good at all in week 2, a guy that I thought would be rejuvenated and do very well in Denver, especially coming home in his first home game. The fans were booing them. That offense and some of the play calling was god awful. So I do think San Francisco, who I like Jimmy Garoppolo more than Trey Lance. I am really sorry for what happened to him. That is a very rough injury being out for the year, and I hope the best for his recovery. But they're in good hands with Jimmy Garoppolo, who almost led them to a Super Bowl last year. So give me the Niners on the road to win -1.5, and I'm playing under 45. I think that's a pretty good lock there. If I were to lock that in, I'm confident in the under in that game. Finally, Monday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. Not really an exciting Monday night game, but I have the Giants covering that too and winning at home. Look, Dallas put up a good fight at home last week with that defense against the Cincinnati Bengals, but the Giants, man, they starting off hot and kind of surprising. So give me the Giants at home, -2, but I'm playing under 39.5, and I know 39.5 is already low, but I think that this game will be very, very low scoring. Not a lot of offense there, so not many players you want in fantasy, maybe besides their defenses. But give me the Giants to win. That is your predictions for week 3. And we're going to jump to the daily fantasy lineup for week 3, and we'll see if we can top the 154 we got from week 2. At quarterback, in the surprise here, I'm going Joe Flacco. 5,300 this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Look, Flacco's passed for over 600 passing yards in the first 2 games, and he's thrown for 4 touchdowns. Last week, a very good performance in the comeback victory in Cleveland. Now he gets the Bengals defense at home that allowed Cooper Rush to do well over them. So for 5,300, and I can pay up at the other positions, yeah, give me a little bit of Joe Flacco this week. I think he is a good value at that price. Next, we're going running back Austin Eckler, paying 8,000 for him. Eckler is just due for a big week, right? He hasn't hit the end zone yet. I think he does in this game. 9 receptions last week, plus 14 rushes, playing against that poor Jaguars defense. If Herbert is out, they're going to go to him more, so that makes it an even more lovable at that price, and paying down for Joe Flacco makes it worth it. So I like me some Austin Eckler this week. I also like David Montgomery, who I said I was going to talk about, and here we go. The Chicago Bears running back for 5,900. That's a good price for a guy that's getting a lot of touches, 32 touches in his first 2 games, and he had 122 yards on the ground last week. I think Chicago knows that they got to get him involved if they want to win. And they're going to be playing a worse defense in Houston than they did in Green Bay last weekend. So I think that Montgomery will find the end zone. He'll get you close to 100-yard rushing and a good value of the 5,900. In a week that running backs, I don't think are going to have that great of weeks. I think they're just going to all be kind of average. I don't think there's going to be a huge standout performance like we saw last week with Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb. So at the 5,900, a good price for David Montgomery. Now the wide receivers, where we paid up a little bit more, and we're paying for the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy in the first 2 weeks, and Stephon Diggs. 20 receptions already in 2 games, 4 touchdowns. He's just tearing it up. It's Josh Allen's guy. I don't care what defense he's playing against. He's worth it for that price. And Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson are going over him at a much higher value and DraftKings and daily fantasy this week. So give me a lot of Stephon Diggs this week. And a guy that's on my list the past 2 weeks, and again, a guy that I absolutely love, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, 7,200. His price is going to continue to rise because he gets all the targets. He gets all the catches there in Detroit. So I am going with him this week to come up big against the Commanders. Or I'm sorry, he was against the Commanders last week, but against the Vikings, it really doesn't matter. We saw last week, the Philadelphia Eagles, they were able to pass all around, all on him to get the ball to AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. So you know where they're going. They're going Amon-Ra St. Brown, and a great price at 7,200, worth paying up for. Surprising enough, you can get T. Higgins here in this lineup as well for 6,100 for the Cincinnati Bengals. Week one gets hurt with a concussion, but comes back in week two with a great performance. He had 6 receptions, 71 yards, and 1 touchdown, pretty much all of that coming in the second half. He was also targeted 10 times, which I really like. And Cincinnati needs to win this game. So they're going to do whatever it takes to win. So they're going to utilize T. Higgins big this week at the New York Jets. So give me some T. Higgins. I'm also going wide receiver Noah Brown. If you don't know him now, you do. Noah Brown, a big week last week, and pretty much in his first 2 games, he's done well. He found the end zone last week for Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush likes him, and 5 catches in each of the first 2 games at 4,500. Great value for him going on the road against that Giants defense. I'm sure he'll get at least 5 or 6 receptions and a touchdown. So as a flex play, what great value, 4,500 for Noah Brown. Tight end, we're going Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints, and this is probably the lowest I've ever paid for a player. But again, we're paying up for a lot of top guys this week in our running back and wide receiver positions, meaning I had to find somebody that was really low. And at 2,900, you get Juwan Johnson, who had 7 targets and 4 receptions for 40 yards against a very tough Tampa Bay defense last week. I think he can easily produce the same numbers, if not better, against that Carolina defense. So for 2,900, what a steal, what value. Give me all of Juwan Johnson this week. And finally, the defense. I never pay up for a defense until last week with the Buffalo Bills. It was worth it, but we're going to, again, try to save some money to boost up the running backs and wide receivers. So we're going the Giants defense versus the Dallas Cowboys at home. I think it'll be a low scoring affair, and the Giants will be worth it for the 2,400. So that is my DraftKings daily fantasy lineup for the week. And finally, our week 3 start sits. Start Joe Flacco. I already told you why. Quarterback 6 so far in the first 2 games. He is a must start against this Bengals defense. I'm sitting Tua, and Tua just came off one of the biggest performances of his career. It was the biggest performance of his career, but one of the craziest games we've ever seen. 6 touchdown passes thrown and 469 yards to come back to beat the Baltimore Ravens. There's no way he does anything like that this week. He's going up against the Bills defense, of course, Matt Stafford to throw 3 picks in week 1. And last week, Ryan Tannehill threw a pick, and they got 2 picks from him last week and 2 fumbles. So that defense is going to wreak havoc against the Miami Dolphins. And Tua, very young, he's going to make mistakes. He threw 2 picks last week. He's going to do something like that this week. He won't do as well. So I would be sitting Tua Tagovailoa. And I know you say, well, he just had one of the best performances. I got to start him. I wouldn't. I'd find some value elsewhere. I already discussed David Montgomery for a start, and I told you why. I think he has a big week this week. But I'm sitting running back A.J. Dillon, and they really utilize him in the run game over Aaron Jones, who they utilize in the passing game. And we saw how that played into effect last week with Jones' huge week. But you're going up against a very good run defense in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I think A.J. Dillon, some people play him as a flex. It won't even be an option of that this week. I would sit him. I guess that's Tampa Bay D. Yes, I talked about it earlier, but I am going to start. Instead of sit last week, we're starting Tyler Lockett this week. 9 receptions for 107 yards. He hasn't found the end zone yet, but he's going to do it this week against that Atlanta Falcons defense. He's going to have at least 1 touchdown, possibly 2 touchdowns this week at home. Give me all of Tyler Lockett. And a guy that I'm sitting and a guy that's actually performed really well in the first 2 weeks is Curtis Samuel, the Washington Commander. Wide receiver 8 so far in the first 2 weeks. I think they're going to focus on that, the Philadelphia defense. So that's why I'm kind of going to be sitting him. I don't think he puts up as good of a performance as people might expect. But if he's on the waivers, which he was in one of my leagues, I am shocked. I picked him up because it could be good trade value. Or if a wide receiver goes down, you can put him right into the starting spot. Lastly, we're starting Irv Smith Jr. of the Minnesota Vikings. He had 0 receptions in week one, but he had 5 receptions for a touchdown in week two. They're going up against a poor Detroit defense. So, they're going to have to pass the ball a lot. So give me Irv Smith Jr. to start. And I'm sitting tight end Mike Gesicki. I told you to sit him 2 weeks ago, which was smart. I'm telling you to do it again. Again, this Bills defense is just going to be too much. And what's going to happen is that Tua is going to focus in on trying to force the ball to Waddle and Hill, which means Gesicki won't get the looks. So I'm sitting Mike Gesicki. Guys, I want to thank you for watching the Sports Lock podcast this week. And next week, I have a special guest coming on. It is Batty Mahomes, Jaguars Walter Picks. Charlotte Haggerty is going to be on here doing predictions with me. She is a fantasy football pro over on TikTok. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see her accounts there. So go follow her. Make sure to like and subscribe. Over 2.2 million likes between the two accounts. She makes some great content, some funny videos, and she's a part of a huge 32-person league with Walter Pick. So she'll be here to talk a little bit more about herself and the love of fantasy football. And we're going to go head to head with some predictions. So you don't want to miss that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, like and share this video. You can find me over on Instagram at SportsLock Podcast, as well as on my new TikTok account at SportsLock Podcast. If you want, you can also follow my main one, the Beast Penny Cakes. I know it's funny, but I got some good content over there. I got about 3,000 followers and 60-some thousand likes. So not as good as Charlotte up above, but we're going to try to get there with my love and passion of fantasy football. So I will see you guys next week. Don't know if it'll be Tuesday or Wednesday yet, but we're going to work out the details and bring a great podcast for you then. So thank you for listening in. Good luck to you in fantasy football this week. Hopefully you win some money from my sports locks. I'm really hoping that I do as well. See you guys next week.